Book 6, Chapter 9. But this was already being laid up in his memory to be a medicine hereafter. So was that also, that when he was yet studying under me at Carthage, and was thinking over at midday in the marketplace what he was to say by heart, as scholars use to practice, thou sufferest him to be apprehended by the officers of the marketplace for a thief. For no other cause, I deem, didst thou, our God, suffer it, but that he, who was hereafter to prove so good a man, should already begin to learn that in judging of causes, man was not readily to be condemned by man out of a rash credulity. For as he was walking up and down by himself before the judgment seat, with his notebook and pen, lo, a young man, a lawyer, the real thief, privily bringing a hatchet, got in, unperceived by Alypius, as far as the leaden gratings, which fence in the silversmiths' shops, and began to cut away the lead. But the noise of the hatchet being heard, the silversmiths beneath began to make a stir, and sent to apprehend whomever they should find. But he hearing their voices ran away, leaving his hatchet, fearing to be taken with it. Alypius now, who had not seen him enter, was aware of his going, and saw with what speed he made away, and being desirous to know the matter, entered the place, where finding the hatchet he was standing, wondering and considering it, when behold, those that had been sent, find him alone with the hatchet in his hand, the noise whereof had startled and brought them thither. They seize him, hale him away, and gathering the dwellers in the marketplace together, boast of having taken a notorious thief, and so he was being led away to be taken before the judge. But thus far was Alypius to be instructed, for forthwith, O Lord, thou succourest his innocency, whereof thou alone wert witness. For as he was being led either to prison or to punishment, a certain architect met them, who had the chief charge of the public buildings. Glad they were to meet him especially, by whom they were wont to be suspected of stealing the goods lost out of the marketplace, as though to show him at last by whom these thefts were committed. He, however, had divers times seen Alypius at a certain senator's house, to whom he often went to pay his respects, and recognizing him immediately, took him aside by the hand, and inquiring the occasion of so great a calamity, heard the whole matter, and bade all present, amid much uproar and threats, to go with him. So they came to the house of the young man who had done the deed. There, before the door, was a boy so young as to be likely, not apprehending any harm to his master, to disclose the whole. For he had attended his master to the marketplace, whom so soon as Alypius remembered, he told the architect. And he, showing the hatchet to the boy, asked him, whose that was? Ours, quoth he presently, and being further questioned, he discovered everything. Thus the crime being transferred to that house, and the multitude ashamed, which had begun to insult over Alypius, he who was to be a dispenser of thy word, and an examiner of many causes in thy church, went away better experienced and instructed. Chapter 10. Him then I had found at Rome, and he clave to me by a most strong tie, and went with me to Milan, both that he might not leave me, and might practice something of the law he had studied, more to please his parents than himself. There he had thrice sat as assessor with an uncorruptness, much wondered at by others, he wondering at others rather, who could prefer gold to honesty. His character was tried besides, not only with the bait of covetousness, but with the goad of fear. At Rome he was assessor to the count of the Italian treasury. There was at that time a very powerful senator, to whose favours many stood indebted, many much feared. He would needs, by his usual power, have a thing allowed him, which by the laws was unallowed. Alypius resisted it, a bribe was promised, with all his heart he scorned it, threats were held out. He trampled upon them, all wondering at so unwonted a spirit, which neither desired the friendship nor feared the enmity of one so great and so mightily renowned for innumerable means of doing good or evil. And the very judge, whose counsellor Alypius was, although also unwilling it should be, yet did not openly refuse, but put the matter off upon Alypius, alleging that he would not allow him to do it, for in truth had the judge done it, Alypius would have decided otherwise, With this one thing in the way of learning was he well nigh seduced, that he might have books copied for him at Praetorian prices, but consulting justice, he altered his deliberation for the better, esteeming equity, whereby he was hindered more gainful than the power whereby he were allowed. These are slight things, but he that is faithful in little is faithful also in much. Nor can that anyhow be void, which proceeded out of the mouth of thy truth. If ye have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust true riches? And if ye have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? He, being such, did at that time cleave to me, and with me wavered in purpose, what course of life was to be taken. Nebridius also, who having left his native country near Carthage, yea, and Carthage itself, where he had much lived, leaving his excellent family estate and house and a mother behind, who was not to follow him, had come to Milan for no other reason but that with me he might live in a most ardent search after truth and wisdom. Like me he sighed, like me he wavered, an ardent searcher after true life, and a most acute examiner of the most difficult questions. Thus were there the mouths of 3 indigent persons, sighing out their wants one to another, and waiting upon thee that thou mightest give them their meat in due season. And in all the bitterness, which by thy mercy followed our worldly affairs, as we looked towards the end, why we should suffer all this, darkness met us. And we turned away groaning, and saying, How long shall these things be? This too we often said, and so saying forsook them not, for as yet there dawned nothing certain, which, these forsaken, we might embrace. Chapter 11. And I, viewing and reviewing things, most wondered at the length of time from that my 19th year, wherein I had begun to kindle with the desire of wisdom, settling when I had found her, to abandon all the empty hopes and lying frenzies of vain desires. And lo, I was now in my 30th year, sticking in the same mire, greedy of enjoying things present, which passed away and wasted my soul, while I said to myself, Tomorrow I shall find it. It will appear manifestly, and I shall grasp it. Lo, Faustus the Manichee will come, and clear everything. O you great men, ye academicians, it is true then, that no certainty can be attained for the ordering of life. Nay, let us search the more diligently, and despair not. Lo, things in the ecclesiastical books are not absurd to us now, which sometimes seemed absurd, and may be otherwise taken, and in a good sense. I will take my stand, where, as a child, my parents placed me, until the clear truth be found out. But where shall it be sought, or when? Ambrose has no leisure, and we have no leisure to read. Where shall we find even the books? Whence or when procure them? From whom borrow them? Let set times be appointed, and certain hours be ordered for the health of our soul. Great hope has dawned. The Catholic faith teaches not what we thought, and vainly accused it of. Her instructed members hold it profane to believe God to be bounded by the figure of a human body. And do we doubt to knock, that the rest may be opened? The forenoons our scholars take up. What do we during the rest? Why not this? But when they pay, we court to our great friends, whose favour we need. When compose what we may sell to scholars? When refresh ourselves, unbending our minds from this intenseness of care? Perish everything, dismiss we these empty vanities, and betake ourselves to the one search for truth. Life is vain, death uncertain. If it steals upon us on a sudden, in what state shall we depart hence? And where shall we learn what here we have neglected? And shall we not rather suffer the punishment of this negligence? What, if death itself cut off and end all care and feeling? Then must this be ascertained. But God forbid this. It is no vain and empty thing, that the excellent dignity of the authority of the Christian faith hath overspread the whole world. Never would such and so great things be by God wrought for us, if with the death of the body the life of the soul came to an end. Wherefore delay then to abandon worldly hopes, and give ourselves wholly to seek after God and the blessed life. But wait, even those things are pleasant. They have some and no small sweetness. We must not lightly abandon them, for it were a shame to return again to them. See, it is no great matter now to obtain some station, and then what should we more wish for? We have store of powerful friends. If nothing else offer, and we be in much haste, at least a presidentship may be given us, and a wife with some money, that she increase not our charges, and this shall be the bound of desire. Many great men, and most worthy of imitation, have given themselves to the study of wisdom in the state of marriage. While I went over these things, and these winds shifted and drove my heart this way and that, time passed on, but I delayed to turn to the Lord, and from day to day deferred to live in Thee, and deferred not daily to die in myself. Loving a happy life, I feared it in its own abode, and sought it by fleeing from it. I thought I should be too miserable, unless folded in female arms, and of the medicine of Thy mercy to cure that infirmity I thought not having tried it. As for continency, I supposed it to be our own power, though in myself I did not find that power, being so foolish as not to know what is written, None can be continent, unless Thou give it. And that Thou wouldst give it, if with inward groanings I did knock at Thine ears, and with a settled faith did cast my care upon Thee. Chapter 12. Alypius indeed kept me from marrying, alleging, that so could we by no means with undistracted leisure live together in the love of wisdom, as we had long desired. For himself was even then most pure in this point, so that it was wonderful, and that the more, since in outset of his youth he had entered into that course, but had not stuck fast therein. Rather had he felt remorse and revolting at it, living thenceforth until now most contentedly. But I opposed him with the examples of those, who as married men had cherished wisdom, and served God acceptably, and retained their friends, and loved them faithfully. Of whose greatness of spirit I was far short, and bound with the disease of the flesh, and its deadly sweetness, drew along my chain, dreading to be loosed, and as if my wound had been fretted, put back his good persuasions, as it were the hand of one that would unchain me. Moreover, by me did the serpent speak unto Alypius himself, by my tongue weaving and laying in his path pleasurable snares, wherein his virtuous and free feet might be entangled. For when he wondered that I, whom he esteemed not slightly, should stick so fast in the birdlime of that pleasure, as to protest, so oft as we discussed it, that I could never lead a single life, and urged in my defence when I saw him wonder that there was great difference between his momentary and scarce remembered knowledge of that life, which so he might easily despise, and my continued acquaintance whereto, if but the honourable name of marriage were added, he ought not to wonder why I could not contemn that course. He began also to desire to be married, not as overcome with desire of such pleasure, but out of curiosity. For he would fain know, he said, what that should be, without which my life, to him so pleasing, would to me seem not life, but a punishment. For his mind, free from that chain, was amazed at my thraldom, and through that amazement was going on to a desire of trying it, thence to the trial itself, and thence perhaps to sink into that bondage whereat he wondered, seeing he was willing to make a covenant with death, and he that loves danger shall fall into it. For whatever honour there be in the office of well ordering a married life, and a family, moved us but slightly. But me for the most part the habit of satisfying an insatiable appetite tormented, while it held me captive. Him, an admiring wonder, was leading captive. So were we, until Thou, O Most High, not forsaking our dust, commiserating us miserable, didst come to our help by wondrous and secret ways. Chapter 13. Continual effort was made to have me married. I wooed, I was promised, chiefly through my mother's pains, that once so married, the health-giving baptism might cleanse me, towards which she rejoiced that I was being daily fitted, and observed that her prayers and thy promises were being fulfilled in my faith. At which time verily, both at my request and her own longing, with strong cries of heart she daily begged of thee, that thou wouldst by a vision discover unto her something concerning my future marriage. Thou never wouldest. She saw indeed certain vain, fantastic things, such as the energy of the human spirit, busied thereon, brought together, and these she told me of, not with that confidence she was wont, when thou showedst her anything, but slighting them. For she could, she said, through a certain feeling, which in words she could not express, discern betwixt thy revelations and the dreams of her own soul. Yet the matter was pressed on, and a maiden asked in marriage, 2 years under the fit age, and, as pleasing, was waited for. Chapter 14. And many of us friends conferring about, and detesting the turbulent turmoils of human life, had debated and now almost resolved on living apart from business and the bustle of men, and this was to be thus obtained. We were to bring whatever we might severally procure, and make one household of all, so that through the truth of our friendship nothing should belong especially to any, but the whole thus derived from all should as a whole belong to each, and to all. We thought there might be some 10 persons in this society, some of whom were very rich, especially Romanianus, our townsman, from childhood a very familiar friend of mine, whom the grievous perplexities of his affairs had brought up to court, who was the most earnest for this project, and therein was his voice of great weight, because his ample estate far exceeded any of the rest. We had settled also that 2 annual officers, as it were, should provide all things necessary, the rest being undisturbed. But when we began to consider whether the wives, which some of us already had, others hoped to have, would allow this, all that plan, which was being so well moulded, fell to pieces in our hands, was utterly dashed and cast aside. Thence we betook us to sighs and groans, and our steps to follow the broad and beaten ways of the world, for many thoughts were in our heart, but thy counsel standeth for ever. Out of which counsel thou didst deride ours, and preparedst thine own, proposing to give us meat in due season, and to open thy hand, and fill our souls with blessing. Chapter 15. Meanwhile my sins were becoming multiplied, and my concubine being torn from my side, as a hindrance to my marriage, my heart which clave unto her was torn and wounded, and bleeding. And she returned to Afric, vowing unto thee never to know any other man, leaving with me my son by her. But unhappy I, who could not imitate a very woman, impatient of delay, inasmuch as not till after 2 years was I to obtain her I sought, not being so much a lover of marriage, as a slave to lust, procured another, though no wife, so that by the servitude of an enduring custom, the disease of my soul might be kept up, and carried on in its vigour, even augmented, into the dominion of marriage. Nor was that my wound cured, which had been made by the cutting away of the former, but after inflammation and most acute pain it mortified, and my pains became less acute, but more desperate. Chapter 16. To thee be praise, glory to thee, fountain of mercies. I was becoming more miserable, and thou nearer. Thy right hand was continually ready to pluck me out of the mire, and to wash me thoroughly, and I knew it not. Nor did anything call me back from a yet deeper gulf of carnal pleasures, but the fear of death, and of thy judgment to come, which amid all my changes never departed from my breast. And in my disputes with my friends Alypius and Nebridius, the nature of good and evil, I held that Epicurus had in my mind won the palm, had I not believed that after death there remained a life for the soul, and places of requital according to men's deserts, which Epicurus would not believe. And I asked, were we immortal, and to live in perpetual bodily pleasure, without fear of losing it, why should we not be happy, or what else should we seek? Not knowing that great misery was involved in this very thing, that, being thus sunk and blinded, I could not discern that light of excellence and beauty, to be embraced for its own sake, which the eyes of flesh cannot see, and is seen by the inner man. Nor did I, unhappy, consider from what source it sprung, that even on these things, foul as they were, I with pleasure discourse with my friends. Nor could I, even according to the notions I then had of happiness, be happy without friends, amid what abundance soever of carnal pleasures. And yet these friends I loved for themselves only, and I felt that I was beloved of them again for myself only. O crooked paths! Woe to the audacious soul which hoped by forsaking Thee to gain some better thing! Turned it hath, and turned again, upon back, sides, and belly, yet all was painful, and Thou alone rest. And behold, Thou art at hand, and deliverest us from our wretched wanderings, and placest us in Thy way, and dost comfort us, and say, Run, I will carry you; yea, I will bring you through; there also will I carry you. End of Book 6.